Well, the future of the New South Wales Transport Minister is on a knife edge this morning with revelations Jo Haylen routinely used her government driver for personal trips. Now, for those watching around the country who haven't been following, it was revealed on the weekend the minister used her driver to take her to a boozy lunch 2 hours out of Sydney in the Hunter Valley. Now, logbooks have also revealed she used a government driver to take her whole family to lunch to a property an hour and a half out of Sydney. And drivers were also tasked with taking the minister and her kids back and forth to weekend sport from the beach house. For their take, let's bring in Daily Telegraph journalist James Willis and commentator Deborah Clay. Good morning to both of you. James, is this the end for Jo Haylen?
I think it's going to be really difficult for Jo to survive this one, and there's been new revelations that have come out every few hours since this story broke in the Sunday Telegraph. It's obviously a terrible look. I think the only thing I would say is it's a really good example of where sometimes we hold pollies to account for the wrong things. Now, I'm really angry about this. I can understand that people are, but clearly, there's a grey area with the rules. She's given a driver. The driver is meant to be for political work. She's misused it on a number of occasions and agreed to pay back the money for the boozy lunch. But she's also the minister that only a few weeks ago was responsible for some of the worst rail strikes that we've seen in Sydney for a long period of time. The whole of Sydney shut down for days. I would have argued that was what she should have lost her job over rather than this. So, yeah, look, I'm of the view that I think she will go. But, look, let's not forget, sometimes we forget some of the other big mistakes Polly's making. In this case for Jo Haylen, she's been in charge of the rail disaster in Sydney. OK, what about be careful what you wish for? Do you think there are other Pollys sitting there who've done very, very similar, and we've got to clarify, this is within the rules. And they're sitting there thinking, well, if we're going to get rid of her, or if she's going to have to walk, how many others are going to have to walk, James? Yeah, and the other thing is that when you look at what happens at a federal level, there's cars that just sit around for hours and hours and hours. The opposition leader in New South Wales yesterday had to admit that he's used the car for dry cleaning, so I think they're all in on it, and I think that obviously makes the public angry. The issue here is whether Chris Minns will allow this to continue as more revelations come out in the days ahead. It's clearly not an isolated incident. Yeah, so Deb, on that, the state opposition leader in New South Wales, Mark Speakman, said yesterday, she should be sacked, and then he said, well, he sends his driver, who's on the clock, who's waiting, I just send him to pick up my dry cleaning.
Dry cleaning.
Is that OK? He's on the clock.
Well, no, it's not, and this is the problem. The only thing that is going to sort all of this out is an audit. So Jo Haylen has come out and said that the use of the car for private reasons, that this is a grey area, but using it to this extent is not a grey area. So for people watching at home, a similar example or a comparative example would be if you're in the corporate space, the use of a corporate credit card. You know that if you are lucky enough to have that corporate credit card, to use it very sparingly, or if you're lucky enough to have access to cab charges. There's always that person who does that trip from Sydney to Wollongong, and then what happens? It ruins it for everybody, and the executives decide to cut it out. I don't understand why in 2025 we're still discussing this. The Bronwyn Bishop helicopter scandal, 2014, and her response was very similar to this. She came out and said that it was within the entitlements, but it shouldn't be. This needs to be cleaned up. It's a mess. Well,
you know what most of us do? We pay out of our own money and then you claim it back on the company. Maybe we could change the rules here and they pay up front.
That's right. And this is a senior minister, extremely well paid, that can afford to... Look, we all love wineries. We all love probably getting a people van to go with our friends for a big weekend. But you're paying the $750 on your own. You're not actually charging taxpayers for that. And it's the one story that fires people up the most. So she's in strife.
This one, Kanye West and his Aussie-born wife Bianca Censori, bit of a stir at the Grammys after she turned up wearing basically nothing. What was your reaction to this, Deb?
My reaction, Nat, I don't know if you've had this dream, but I've had this dream more than a few times where I go out in public and I'm not wearing anything, and it's like a nightmare. So I think that's why a lot of people are perceiving that she is in some way vulnerable. And then, of course, there is Kanye's erratic past. I do think that this goes way beyond anything that Kim K ever did with her sheer dresses. You know, it is extremely sheer. But is this fashion? Is this performance art? I don't think we know.
What did you think, James?
I think the less we see of that shot, the better from now on. And I've seen it so many times, I can't figure out which censors have been applied and which ones are part of the costume, but it was so inappropriate. And actually, to be honest, I know the least about fashion of anyone on this panel, but it overlooked the biggest fashion statement of the night, which was Jaden Smith wearing the house on his head, the big $4,000 house, which is amazing. I mean, you've been to these award nights, Nat. You've got to sit down, you've got to eat, you've got to drink. He's wearing a house the entire time. So that we kind of should be talking more about the house and less about...
You're just deciding to turn the other way and just ignore this whole thing.
Look at him. How did he sit down?
I don't know what that... Have we found out the message behind that yet? There's a lot of strange things that go on at some of these. I'm worried about Bianca. I don't know. Maybe she's into it, but maybe she's under his control. That is what worries me about this whole thing.
Definitely.
Anyway, thank you very much. See you next week. Here's Deborah.